So let's jump into yet again another Transformer Slag podcast Patreon listener question. Once again, if you want to be part of the Transformer Slag podcast, help support the podcast. Let us know we're doing a half-decent job keeping you informed and educated in the Transformer world of what's going on. Patreon.com/Protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below. What does your hard-earned money get you? Well, it gets you your name in the end credit scroll at the end of every segment moving forward, access to the exclusive Transformer Slag podcast Discord, where we break the news, share lore, share sales, save money with your hobby. And of course, depending on what tier, might get a little something in the mail, special access, or might even be able to ask and submit a Patreon listener question. We got a Patreon listener question here from a longtime patron, Space Ghostal. And Space Ghostal wants to know, hey, Proto Man, so you buy a 40-year-old Transformer and you break it. What now? I have been starting a G1 collection on a budget and picking up some, quote, well-loved examples. Yesterday, I finally got a pre-rub 1984 G1 Megatron. First time I ever owned one. 10 minutes after getting him, I transformed him and broke him in half. Ooh, that's brutal. I feel horrible since this toy has lasted 40 years, only for it to get to me and I destroy it. Well, maybe it wasn't you. We'll get into that. What are your thoughts on these aging toys and the impact on our hobby? You're doing Prime's work. Thanks again, Space Ghostal. Well, thank you, Space Ghostal. You know what? This is something that I'm very lucky to have a father who is a toy collector, and to be able to look at his hobby that has been around way longer than our hobby and make comparisons of what would be to come. You know, we always look to the past to understand the future. And my father, people who've probably seen the Father's Day segment on the Proto Retro channel, he's a big Corgi and Dinky diecast collector. Dinky's been around for over 70 years, and Corgi has been around for over 60 years. So much longer span than our barely 40 years of the Transformer brand that's coming up soon. We're not there yet at 40, but we're almost there. But through him, I saw how some things are inevitable. No matter how good you take care of the product, no matter how new it is in the box, some things just can't be avoided because of father time and I'll get into especially afterwards, the intent of when the toy was created. And that's the separation of old toys versus new toys in the collectible community. I'll get into that in a moment. But like, you know, my dad with the diecast, one thing that he's always told me is most of those cars, because they're 60 to 70 years old, even if they're mint in package, the second you open them up, if you would even dare do that, the rubber tires are cracked. They need to be changed. There's just certain things that no matter what you do, time is going to ravage it because these products were created for that moment, for the kids back in the 1950s and the 60s to play with it, to smash it into other cars, and then probably would end up in a landfill or in the garbage. Again, that was the thinking back then. And that same kind of thinking applies to toys in the 70s. Think of like if you were a Star Wars collector, you know, the late 70s with the Kenner Star Wars stuff. They didn't intend for that stuff to be around forever. So a lot of those capes on the Darth Vaders and the Yodas and the Obi-Wans, they were made out of vinyl. They dry out and they crack and they break apart. Or stormtroopers yellowing like crazy because they were made out of a weaker kind of cheaper plastisol plastic. They didn't intend for people to collect these and keep them in the long term and stuff like that. The closest thing that I could say for our 80s generation in terms of that same kind of short-sighted way of thinking let's stay outside of Transformers for a moment, is both the G.I. Joe community and the My Little Pony community. In the case of My Little Pony, you know, 1982, 1983, first year stuff, suffer from what they call pony cancer, which is essentially, you know, the 1982, 1983 vinyl and PVC on these pony bodies breaking down over time due to atmospheric reasons. And as a result, the plastic either starts to break apart or it gets these like weird discolorations and welts. And us as Transformer fans, we only started experiencing that in 1988, 1989, just recently. And when I say recently, maybe the past 10 years, with our Monster Pretender shells. But yet pony collectors have been dealing with that for much longer because their stuff came way before ours than those Monster Pretenders in 1988. So there's so many connections there. And then, of course, the classic one, G.I. Joe, Real American Hero 1982, and their O-rings. Nothing beats looking at a mint-on-card, sealed 1982, 1983 straight-arm, Joe figure. Minty perfect. And the figure is bisected in half in the packaging because the O-ring just degraded over time and the rubber just dried out and the figure just split in half from the torso to the waist and the lower half. So it's just a reality that some things can't be avoided, unfortunately. I mean, that's just how it is. And in the case of your Megatron, going to let's look at 1984 and 1985 Transformers, aka late 70s Diaclone and Microman Transformers, because that's what they are. They were late 70s and very early 80s Japanese product that was not intended to have a long-term lifespan. It's purchased, it's played with, it's destroyed, it's thrown out. There never was the intent that someone was going to buy Gun Robo or Lambor or any of those guys and keep them minty, perfect forever. And they weren't designed to be like that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put in rubber tires on them. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put, a plastic that's pretty much resting on a die-cast joint that I'm pretty sure over time is going to get a little, dried out, a little bit degraded. And then that die-cast, which is going to stay pretty strong, might get a little, surface rust. But that plastic might break down, and when it has to rely on a die-cast joint that isn't going to have any give, stuff is going to snap. So it's not completely your fault. Sometimes certain figures, the way they were stored and the way that they were kept, it just gives it a bad head start and it wasn't going to survive in the long run. I still I have a near complete Generation 1 collection, but I'm constantly upgrading little things here and there because stuff was not perfect when I first bought it. I bought, the best example, my original 1984 pre-rub Sideswipe, Lamborghini, everything. A little bit yellowed over time. There's a little chip on the spoiler I'm not a fan of. I'd love to upgrade it one day to get a minty one. It would cost me a lot of money, but I'd love to get one. But the point is that it's hard to get those first couple of years in perfect condition because a lot of those were designed with the intent that, again, these 70s molds that were not intent for the long run. When you get into, I want to say 1987 Headmasters, you start getting that more modern sensibility that you could take, G1 Chrome Dome and throw them at the wall, and you're probably going to damage the wall but not damage the Chrome Dome. You might lose the head. It's probably the biggest problem with those toys, but you're definitely not going to damage it. There started to just be this sensibility of the toys being able to last longer because of the choice of plastics used, the way they're engineered. There's just a long-term kind of thinking. By 1988, the collectible market really started to surface, both in the comic book world, the baseball card world is starting to see a collectability. All of a sudden, the term collector's edition or collectible or first edition, first issue collector's edition, stuff like that started to surface in the mid to late 80s. And no surprise that same kind of application and thinking was also applied to toys. By the time we got into the early 90s, next thing you know, you have store exclusives, you have collectible numbered action figures. All of a sudden, it's a different ballgame. So the second you enter that kind of market, now toys are being designed with a sense that they have to last the long haul because people intend to keep it for the long haul as an investment. No one is going to want to buy gold as an investment if they know that in 10 years or 20 years, it's going to degrade and fall apart. So it's kind of a different mentality. And going back to what you said, what happened to your Megatron, it wasn't your fault. It's just the sad truth with the touchy nature of some of these older figures. I know me personally, when I mess with my Generation 1 Jetfire, I am terrified to touch that thing because the red plastic areas that make his armor and those small, tiny clips that are literally no bigger than a fingernail that hold that thing together. I'm worried one day any of those could just snap off and just break and chip off, and that's it. I leave it in robot mode permanently because I can't trust it. Even with my own hands, I'm from myself, let alone if anyone else messed with it. So it's certain figures are still pretty touchy to this day. And Generation 1 Megatron, yeah, I'm pretty confident in the one I have. I've had it for over 30 years. No, when did I get it? I got it in, no, not 30 years. I'd have to say 25 years. I have to say 1995, 96 I got him. But the point is that, you know, he's something that I'm pretty sure maybe 10 years from now of this recording, he might not, I might not have that confidence anymore. It might be a little more fragile, regardless of me keeping it out of the sun and keeping it in a good environment that has no way of getting damaged by the atmospheric kind of thing. But that's a whole other discussion. I've done a segment about that, about storage of Transformers and conditions like that damage the product. But at the end of the day, what's going to probably happen in our hobby is there's going to be less and less of those first couple of years of Transformers. But that being said, when you get into the later generations, most stuff is okay. Most stuff is pretty bulletproof. For every Beast Wars Grimlock GPS kind of situation, or Beast Wars Inferno, or Rampage with his clear plastic, you know, one or two clear plastic examples are probably going to come up, but it's not going to be like a line-wide kind of thing. I mean, I look at like something like, I'm just looking up here, you know, Transformers Armada. I'd have to say about 99% of that line is bulletproof. And then, of course, the gold plastic of Optimus Prime, the leader Optimus Prime, that one's going to be an issue. But most of it is pretty bulletproof. You know, like there's nothing that's going to happen with any of those molds. And then when you look at, let's see, Energon, almost everything on that line is bulletproof with the exception of the O-ring kicker figure. But I don't think anyone's worried about a kicker figure. But the O-ring kicker figure is probably going to be the only one that's going to have any kind of long-term issues. It's just, it really has to do with those early years when the toy designers had a very different kind of goal in mind. And it wasn't the long-term longevity of toys, more of the short-term kind of thing. It's the same thing with bootlegs. Like the bootleg market, it's like, why do they make it out of such crappy plastic? Because it's in a market that, you know, the kids are going to play with it, it's going to break, and, you know, you only paid $1. So it is what it is, like I always say. But I hope that kind of answers your question. And again, the long-term effects will be fine because a lot of collectors today actually don't collect 84, 85, 86. It really is a uniquely G1 problem, and even more so a uniquely 84, 85, and some 86 G1 problem. Yeah, of course, we could go into Master Force and go, oh, hey, you know, Black Zarek, GPS. Yeah, we could hyper-focus on the GPS issues that pocket itself throughout the years or yellowing for certain figures. But in general, it really is just those few early years of those Diaclone and Microman molds and the way they were designed and the way they were engineered that really wasn't intended for play, let alone long-term play. And that's where you're going to always kind of encounter that problem. So I hope that answers your question, Space Ghostal. I hope you guys learned something from Space Ghostal's really good question. And again, if you want to be like Space Ghostal, ask a Patreon listener question, or you just want to just be part of the Patreon and help support the podcast and come hang out in the Discord, again, patreon.com/Protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below. And like I always say, rock out with the robots in disguise.